Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Oh, Mike, I think you know exactly how it's going.
Good?
Good. Yes.
Good.
I knew you would know.
All right, let's take care of some upkeep stuff, and we can get into our discussion topics for today. The first one is certainly something that I'm sure people want to hear about, but yeah, let's get into it. First off, we are brought to you as every week in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art provides you with a variety of dice bags, playmats, art prints, and tokens from throughout the history of Magic as a whole, and throughout the history of the world as a whole. So if you're looking to spice up your play experience, get some fancy things to play Magic on and with, go check them out. We are affiliates over there, so either use originalmagicart.store/commentary or the affiliate code commentary in all caps as you check out, and you'll get 10% off your order. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win all around. Once again, that is originalmagicart.store/commentary or commentary in all caps as an affiliate code for 10% off. How's it? What do you have for us this week, Adrian?
Oh, good. Well, also, we have a Patreon for just $1 an episode. You too can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, as well as getting access to our Patreon-exclusive Discord channel. Plus, I'll give you a shout-out one day.
Yes, you will. All right. Finally, we are brought to you in part every week by Hipsters of the Coast. They are a really great Magic content site. They have all sorts of stuff for a variety of formats, so go check them out. See what exists outside the world of Pauper. All right, Adrian. First off, you've heard the proposed mulligan changes, and
yes, I'm afraid I have.
That's the first thing we got to talk about. So, do you want to go through the proposed new mulligan, and we can kind of go back and forth on this?
Oh, the irony! Mike told me not to get too into it on the pre-show, and yet, oh my, I did anyway. Yes. So basically, the new mulligan rule is that you will now, instead of scrying, you draw back up to 7, and then you put on the bottom of your library the amount of cards that you mulliganed to. Did I say that right?
Like you put n cards on the bottom of your library, where n is the number of times you've mulliganed.
I think that's what I said.
Yeah, just so you still go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Stupider. Yes. And so the concern that people have is that this will break eternal formats and make combo decks way too consistent. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's the main concern, but I think I want to focus more on the fact that I think that this is better in terms of the experience of a quote unquote non-game. I think
yes.
I think this just cuts that so drastically.
Mike and I were talking about it before the show, and I agree. And I think that something that we should also consider, that I talked to Mike about, is consider Nexus of Fate, where it was banned but only in one version of Standard, best of one. I don't see a reason. A lot of the concern is about, eternal formats in this mulligan rule. I don't see a reason why you couldn't have this mulligan rule for Standard and then the Vancouver mulligan rule, or even a different one for eternal formats. I think that Wizards, with that ban on Nexus of Fate, is moving towards an idea that not all formats have to be 100% the same.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I feel like if they're going to selectively apply it, I think this is a great change for Limited. I absolutely adore this in Draft. I think this is like a slam dunk there. I think if they're going to apply it in specific areas, I'd rather see like Limited, so Draft and Sealed, gets this London mulligan. Everything else sticks with Vancouver. Like if they're going to split it, my concern is like the fracturing of like these different rule sets that are all just different enough that it's kind of a huge pain to keep track of. But I could be wrong on that. Maybe this is old man yelling at cloud, and I just don't understand the future of Magic. But in my mind, the interesting thing for me is that this just reduces the number of games where a player doesn't get to play because they got mana screwed. And I think all in all, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a positive change. Going to be interesting to see how it affects other formats. But again, also they're just testing it. There's no guarantee this will ever make it into other tournaments even. And I think they're testing it specifically on Modern because Modern is sort of the poster child of like broken non-interactive games, which is kind of funny when you think about it because I think most people think of Vintage that way, but I think it's Modern.
Yeah, especially current Modern, which is deeply populated by very degenerate decks that are just trying to not really play a two-sided game of Magic.
Yeah, I don't really play Modern anymore, as you probably know.
Yeah, but I think it's unclear as to how this would shake out in Pauper, but I think the interesting thing is that if you have a format that's made up of powerful linear strategies and also has powerful hate cards for it, I think you kind of balance out on that. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing to see with Mythic Championship London is how does it work out? Because, you know, if your opponent is on dredge, like, sure, they can mull more aggressively into a good dredge hand. You can also more aggressively mull into like a Leyline of the Void. And
yeah.
I'm not sure how that exactly shakes out. One of my friends who I play EDH with, who also plays Legacy, was actually saying that he's specifically worried about Stompy decks in Legacy.
Oh yeah, that's what I play.
His concern is that it makes it way easier for those decks to get Soul Land Chalice.
Yeah, I understand that. Certainly, in my experience, like I wouldn't go to 5 for that. You know what I mean? But maybe I'm a bad Stompy player, so.
But that's the really interesting thing about this mulligan is like a 5 is no longer, you know, I'm going to get 5 cards and I hope there's enough lands to play and I hope, you know, things go well. Like 5 now is I'm going to look at 7 and I'm going to take the best 5 out of it.
That's true.
And I did like just some casual testing. I picked up like Pauper Burn.
Some hypergeometric calculations.
I did run hypergeometric calculations on a very simplified model. Like I tossed out the idea of like, okay, if I have a mono red aggro deck with 20 lands and I want to see 2 to 3 lands in my opener, seeing like how those odds panned out, it really doesn't matter until you get to like 5 and below. That's when you start to see like that really heavy divergence of hitting that like 2 to 3 lands in your opener. Now, that said, I mean, if you can mulligan more aggressively, I think there's also the side effect of people are going to cut land as a result of this if it goes into effect.
Not the Pauper lands.
Yeah, I know. It's gonna be an interesting affair.
Not the lands.
But yeah, I think like one of the interesting things, like if you want to test this out at home, is literally just like take a deck, shuffle it up, and what I was doing was I was just ripping 5 and looking at them and saying, is this a keepable hand? And then
drawing 2 more.
Then drawing 2 more and then saying, okay, could I now make a keepable 5 out of these 7? And there's a reasonable amount of times where it was just like, okay, cool. Like this 5 was unkeepable. This 7 minus these 2 is not great. It's still a mull to 5. But I'm not just going to sit here and hope that the top card of my deck is a land.
In that regards, I do like it. I think overall it's definitely a step forward for the game.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they're testing it with Modern first on like a large scale, because I believe the announcement said they'd actually been testing this internally for limited and standard, and they didn't feel like it was problematic there. But I'm glad that they're going to be getting like a very large test sample size, and we'll be able to gather feedback from players and also just watching matches and seeing how mulligans shake out. But I mean, I remember when the Vancouver mulligan came in, I was much more comfortable like on an iffy hand going to 6.
Yeah, I think, and that was a part of that too, was play, helping reduce field bads. And people also thought that was a bad idea. If you recall, people were like, "Oh well, now Delver's just going to be super busted." Well, things have panned out. Delver is still Delver, but I don't think the mulligan rule helped the deck out as much as people thought it was going to.
So I guess the real question here is, Adrian, is one land spy playable in Pauper now? For what it's
There's
worth,
not a lot that would have convinced me, but this certainly does.
like, I certainly think, like, even though I took like the easy pot shot there against one of the most rickety combo decks, like, the deck is better with the London mulligan.
Yes, 100%.
And
I don't know if that makes it viable, because the other thing you have to think about is like a deck like Sneak and Show, right? It's going to benefit a lot more from the rule because they're going to be able to mulligan to Lotus Petal, City of Traders, Show and Tell, Emrakul. A deck like One Land Spy, however, I think needs a little bit more.
I haven't looked at lists for it in ages. Like, I don't know if it has like turn one wins off of like mull to sixes, but I know it has I know most configurations of the deck do have a turn one win possible. And I think like if you can say like even a couple of 6-card hands can get there on it, I think like it is not as unreasonable as I would have said it was before we heard about this proposed change. I don't know. That's a very non-committal way to say like, don't play One Land Spy. It's still not going to be good even with this mulligan, but it will be better.
Well, yeah. Something else I saw that was interesting is its interactions with cards like Grenzo. But also, me and my friend were talking about it too. I can't remember exactly what cards were affected by this, but like basically when you make a rule change and the card no longer functions as it was originally intended to function.
Oh, like, serum powder?
Yeah, serum powder gets worse, but I was thinking even older than that. There's like a card that used to say, it basically used to give you mana burn even for your untapped lands. But since mana burn is no longer a thing, the card just doesn't actually do anything anymore. So it's just interesting when rules get changed and cards get sort of negated.
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't think that there's any deck that benefits from this. I will note that someone from Wizards later on Twitter clarified that this rule has been set so that if you mulligan to 0, you cannot do that in perpetuity. And I don't think that there's some combo where knowing the bottom 7 cards of your deck is super, super valuable.
But you can't just keep doing it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's like
I
wonder if that's like an organized play thing, so people like don't salt out and just like, if they have to keep mulliganing, like mull to 0 a million times and just like take all the time in the world, or if Wizards is just concerned that someone's going to figure out how to break it. But
I think it's a fine idea.
Yeah, I think it's just like a safety valve for like, hey, we don't know if there's something that breaks this, but let's just be safe. All right. So yeah, that's the mulligan rule. I am generally positive about this. I really like it for EDH, which I spend my weekends playing EDH for a morning. I really like it for a format that's 100-card singleton. It makes mulligans much more attractive, especially since Partial Paris went away ages ago. Now I do want to, before we move on, just hit you with another option. So the format Canadian Highlander has another alternate mulligan. They do you get your first 7, and you get 2 6s, 2 5s, 2 4s, so on and so forth.
Oh, interesting. I kind of like that too.
And it does have the Vancouver Scry added on. So like, even if you keep your second 6, you still get to scry 1.
I do kind of like that. It sort of bridges the gap, I feel like, between these two. Not like in actuality, but just in like terms of helping reduce the feel bads. Yeah.
And I don't think either of them are like perfect solutions. Like with Canadian Highlander, it's specifically done because like 100-card singleton decks are inherently inconsistent. So kind of slowing how quickly the mulligan eats away at your hand and your odds of winning makes a lot of sense there, since
I don't know if you can ever truly fix the feel bads in a game that inherently involves chance.
yeah, I think like the goal here though is just to like minimize that effect.
Yes, absolutely. I just think that there will always be some level of, well, you didn't draw what you needed to draw. Well, your deck wasn't good to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and remember, this is like just the mulligan. Like all this does is basically determine like whether or not you can play a game.
Yeah, you're right. And in that regards, it's a great call.
Yeah, like there's still all the variance of your draws on subsequent turns. Like Magic is an ridiculously complicated game in terms of statistics and so on, and I'm no Frank Karsten, so I'm not even gonna try and touch that with a 10-foot pole. All right,
wow, you coward.
Any other thoughts on mulligans and all this?
I'm excited to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, me too. All right. So today we're hopping in the time machine. Adrian, can you give me a time machine sound effect?
I was just about to give you one, and it would sound something like this.
All right. So we are going back in time to actually the year that this podcast started. So we are going back to 2015.
Truly a simpler time. Also, have we really been doing this for almost 4 years?
Maybe I just miscalculated when we started this podcast.
Oh, okay. I was like, damn, that's a long time.
All right, whatever. We're going back to 2015 anyway.
Whatever.
I picked out a deck list from that year. Yeah, wow. No, I'm a complete turkey. I totally forgot how time works.
It doesn't matter.
No, but what we wanted to do is we wanted to look back on a deck that no longer really sees a lot of play. And we talked in the pre-show a little bit about options we had. You know, we could talk about a banned deck, and I tossed out the idea of goblins because this deck was still reasonable when we really got into Pauper, right?
Yeah, and sadly fallen from grace. And it's so funny. I said, Mike, why isn't goblins good anymore? And he said, well, it's just not aggressive enough, which is not the first thing you think of when you think of a mono red creature-based deck. However, I will say goblins is actually a lot grindier, I think, than a lot of people really gave it credit for back in the day.
Yeah, like this is not a just play things, turn them sideways red deck. I feel like both of the tribal decks that we really have in Pauper, this and Elves, are a lot more complicated than a lot of other decks in the format. And in Goblin's case, it was the weird packages in it. I'm just gonna get into this. So, especially because I'm sure there are listeners out there who weren't around for the days when this deck was actually good. The core of this deck for ages was 2 cards. It was Goblin Sledder and Mog Raider, and they're both 1/1 goblins for a red, and you can sacrifice another goblin to give another creature +1/+1 until end of turn. And in the list we're looking at, it's 2 of each, so even split. So Adrian, why are these played?
Goblin Sledder?
Yeah, Sledder and Raider, the functional reprints.
Yes, sorry. They're basically Arcbound Ravager. Yeah, you can quote me on that. But these are Pauper Arcbound Ravager, where you're able to generate additional value off of them and get really tricky in combat. Unlike Arcbound Ravager, they don't leave behind +1/+1 counters, but they're useful against cards like Echoing Decay. They're good to sack someone, to pump in a lethal attack. They're good to sack something else to save another creature. Really, just like these are the reasons I think Goblins was a deck, is because they just had so much utility and versatility when they were in play.
Yeah, and one of the other things that folks might not be aware of if they weren't playing back in the day, but this was also an era where mono black control was a reasonable option, and that deck got to play why can't I come up with the name of it? Tendrils of Corruption, the 4 mana instant
gain life,
gain life and deal damage to a creature equal to the number of swamps you control. And if you can sacrifice your stuff in response, you don't have to worry about actually being outpaced in terms of life. So that was a big upside. Other classics for this deck include Foundry Street Denizen. It's a red for a 1/1. Whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Adrian, you played mono red in like the Return to Ravnica era. This was this in there?
No,
Really?
it was not. Well, because Rakdos Cackler was a thing, and Stromkirk Noble was a thing. Those were like the two most played 1-drops.
Okay. I can see that. But yeah, this thing just, if you can, like, most of your things in this deck are only a couple of mana, and those that aren't usually bring another body along with them. So this thing can get very big very quickly, even if temporarily. And then we have Goblin Bushwhacker. It's a red for a 1/1, continuing with this trend. And in this case, it has kicker for a red. Creatures, and if you pay the kicker, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. And this is, do you think it's fair to say this is the primary win con of this deck?
Yeah. It kills you out of nowhere.
Yeah. It is weird to have a card in a kind of mid-rangey deck that just gets to out of nowhere double the power of all your creatures and swing in.
Yeah, and it gives itself haste, so like that's really good too because it makes all the creatures you also play that turn hasty. Yeah, so it's just a huge amount of damage. A lot of decks aren't really equipped to deal with that on like turn 4. Well, like Trickery makes that a lot different, but yeah, it's a good card. I think it's one of the best cards in the deck.
You got to remember at this point, like, Trickery wasn't being played as a main deck sort of thing. So right. you didn't have to worry about it game 1 most of the time. Moving on to our 2-drops, we have 4 copies of Mog War Marshal. This is 1 and a red for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield or leaves the battlefield, you get a 1/1 red goblin creature token.
This is a major workhorse of the deck. Not only does it combo with Mog Raider and Goblin Slayer for an effective 3 creatures, it's also very good with Goblin Bushwhacker. Yeah,
and the important thing about this is it has Echo, and this is you pay 1 and a red on your next upkeep or sacrifice it. So you kind of have this option where if you have stuff still left in your hand, you can not pay for it and still have the 1/1 body it would have had there. It doesn't have it still has Summoning Sickness, which is a downside, but you get the choice to keep it around and use it for getting tricky in combat, like the fact that you can sack this to a raider and then sack the token it makes to a raider gets you an extra 2 points of damage in. There's tricks.
It's a strong card.
Next up in our 2-drops, we have the card that you were kind of shocked you hadn't seen in a while, Sparksmith. So it's 1 and red for a 1/1, and it has 1 ability on it. Tap. Deal X damage to target creature, where X is the number of goblins you control, and then Sparksmith deals X to you.
Is it the number of goblins you control?
Yes, it is. Almost. Are you curious about if this is a symmetrical where it just counts goblins?
It is symmetrical, where X is the number of goblins on the battlefield.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, Onslaught's too old to.
Onslaught's too old to make this very controllable. So Adrian, why is this card so good, and why are you shocked that it's not still good?
Well, it used to be good because it killed basically anything. Then they printed Gurmag Angler, and it got a lot worse. But yeah, you used to be able to do it to like kill Delvers, Cloud of Fairies, really anything. But it was a repeatable way to kill stuff in a deck that didn't really care a lot about its life total because it typically wanted to be the beatdown. But it was a good spot removal to make sure the rest of your team could swing through.
And like with the sacrifice things, you could also kind of tailor it. So like if you have 5 other goblins in play, and your opponent's at 5, but Sparks and you're also at 5, so Sparksmith would just kill you, and you need to get a blocker out of the way. You could like sack all of them to pump one of your goblins, and then Sparksmith for the correct amount and not kill yourself. Like it was a very interesting card coupled with all of these aristocrat style effects. And yeah, this is no longer that great because Gurmag Angler, like, it's pretty painful to have to five
Right.
yourself.
It's a lot better with little. It doesn't matter because it's equal to the number of goblins you control, but it's obviously better against little creatures where you don't have to commit so many goblins to the battlefield. But yeah, Sparksmith had its day, and it's one of the like I don't. It was good when it was good. Is what I guess is what I'm getting at. Like it was a necessary thing to have in the deck for a time.
Yeah. Next up, we have a pair of copies of Goblin Matron. 2 and a red for a creature goblin. It's a 1/1, and when it comes into play, you get to search your library for a goblin card, put it into your hand, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. And this is one of the other big strengths of the deck. Like, tutors are not that frequent in Pauper, and this kind of let you get whatever you needed, usually a goblin bushwhacker.
Yeah, it gives you Goblin Bushwhacker. There's also another target that we'll discuss a little bit later, but yeah, it's just a catch-all for the deck. Very, very useful, very good for setting up a Bushwhacker turn.
Also gets eaten by Goblin Sledder and Mog Raider. Like, that is... like, the number of times I've seen this get a Bushwhacker and then wind up getting eaten itself is pretty high. All right, rounding out our creature suite, we have 2 copies of Beetleback Chief,
which a lot of people might not know is only legal because of Vintage Masters, alongside such greats as Battle Screech and Chainer's Edict. There was also Beetleback Chief.
Yeah, and I won't lie, on like a minor like sidestep here, it does really bother me that there's not a printing of this with a common set symbol.
You've mentioned that several times. That really bugs you, huh?
It really does.
Don't play Boros.
I have a Pauper cube, and it bothers me so much when there's like something that I can get a foil of, because this also didn't have a foil for a long time.
Yeah, it got reprinted in Eternal Masters as a foil?
I think Eternal Masters was the first foiling of this thing, and for ages it didn't even have a foil version, and now it still doesn't have a common foil. But
its original printing was in Plane Chase, right? Is it older than that? No.
I think Plane Chase was the first time this thing got printed. But
yeah, anyway, Plane Chase.
This is 2 red for a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1 goblin creature tokens. So 4 power over 3 bodies, and it's also itself a 2/2, making it the largest part of this deck. So I guess the question is Beetleback
this
Chief
card is good?
Just is it just kind of there because there's no extra copies of Mog War Marshal you can put in?
I think you're undervaluing Beetleback Chief. It is a 2/2, so that's nothing to sneeze at in this deck. It also creates 3 things for Goblin Bushwhacker, Goblin Sledder, and Mog Raider. Goblin Matron can get it if you have a lot of extra mana lying around, and I don't think it's unfair to have a turn 4 Beetleback Chief and then a turn 5 kicked Bushwhacker. I think Beetleback Chief is also a great way for this deck to get back in the game if you somehow manage to deal with all of its goblins, because suddenly you have 3 more to deal with. So I think Beetleback Chief is fine.
Yeah, I guess it does kind of spam the board a little bit. All right, let's get into some of our...
there's even another reason to play it that, again, we'll get into a little later on. This is not really a stock goblin list as I remember them.
No. This is a little bit more token heavy. But it's got some spice to it that we're going to get into. Next up, and this is a Goblins classic, Death Spark. Death Spark is a red mana for an instant. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, if it's in your graveyard with a creature card directly above it, you can pay 1 generic and put it back in your hand.
Yep, that's a card.
This card is legitimately kind of good. So the thing about it is, what this is basically every time you sacrifice a goblin, if you have a Death Spark in hand and you have a mana up, you get to ping them for 1. Because when you're about to sacrifice a goblin, you just cast Death Spark, sack the goblin, get it back on your next turn. And this, you mentioned like the fact that this is a kind of grindy deck. Like, I think Death Spark's the epitome of just like a very grindy card.
Yeah, absolutely. And once it rewards you for playing the long game.
Yeah, and like this has game against something like elves. It's not bad against Delver, especially in this era, the Cloud of Fairies era.
Yeah, it was fine. It's still not bad today.
Yeah, I'm a little bit less in love with it nowadays, but because you do need to be able to get a creature dead on top of it.
Right.
Next, 4 lightning bolts, red mana, 3 damage to any target.
Don't leave home without him.
Yeah, don't leave home without him. I don't think there's anything we can say about this that hasn't already been said. But let's move on to the next one. Do you want to tell the folks about Tarfire?
Yeah, Tarfire is shock, but it's also a goblin instant. So it's a tribal instant from Lorwyn, and so you can actually grab it with Goblin Matron, which only requires you to get a goblin card.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Tarfire for a while like part of a modern deck where they used it in conjunction with Tarmogoyf?
Yeah, it was played in the Death Shadows deck as like a one of because that deck played Tarmogoyf, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre card.
But the important part for Tarmogoyf is that it's a tribal card.
Yeah.
The important part of it for Pauper is that it's a goblin tribal.
Yeah, this is a very bizarre mechanic, and I'm really unsurprised they haven't returned to it in a long time.
It's not really that intuitive.
No, it really isn't. And don't even try to get into like the handful of changeling tribal instance where they are all creature types. That's just super bizarre. But yeah, that's Tarfire. Then we have 3 copies of Dragon's Fodder and Krenko's Command, both of which are 1 and a red for a sorcery that creates 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Adrian, what are your favorite 2 modes on Krenko's Command?
What?
It's a command. It has 4 modes. The 4 modes are create a 1/1 goblin, create a 1/1 goblin, create a 1/1 goblin, and create a 1/1 goblin. You get to pick 2 of them.
Oh, I didn't. That joke went out of my head. I think now this deck would play Hordling Outburst, which was not a common at the time.
Oh,
instead of these cards.
I mean, I think you'd play a mix, right? Because
I think you would have to play 4 Hordling Outbursts. I think it's just much better than these cards over a long game.
But yeah, I think you'd want 4 Hordling Outbursts and like 2 of these.
Yeah. I think it'd be a little bit different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Hordling Outburst is just a little bit more high impact. Maybe a Goblin Gathering or 2.
No, we wouldn't play those. We've talked about that, Mike.
We have, and you were not happy with my inability to do basic math. Rounding out our instants and sorceries, we have Fire Blast, which certainly depicts a goblin in the art. It's 4 red instant. You may sacrifice 2 mountains instead of paying its converted mana cost, or paying its mana cost, excuse me. And deals 4 damage to target creature or player.
What's the last card on that list, Mike?
What's the last non-land, you ask?
What's the last non-land?
Let's talk about Raid Bombardment.
Goody, let's.
So this actually, curiously enough, there's an almost reprint of this in Standard, but let's not get too into it. So Raid Bombardment is 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, Raid Bombardment deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. Adrian, your thoughts about Raid Bombardment?
I wish it was Impact Tremors.
Yeah. So Impact Tremors
is what I think about it.
Impact Tremors is 1 and red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you deal 1 damage to each opponent.
And the reason I think that's better is I think Impact Tremors is better when you don't have anything on the board already.
Yeah, they're interesting because
also cost less.
So Impact Tremors is better played the first turn you can cast it, but Raid Bombardment, if you rip it off the top late game and you're in a bit of a board stall.
Oh yeah, if you were in a board stall. If you don't have any creatures, it's much less good. Also, was Raid Bombardment a card, or was Impact Tremors a card when this list got published?
So I'm looking at this particular list, which will be linked down below, and I'm looking at the event it came from.
Impact Tremors was from Dragons.
So I'm seeing other lists, like Angler Delver is a list, but I don't know if this was pre or post Dragons,
Well,
because
Dragons came out in like 2015, like early 2015. So
early 2015. Let me
like maybe even February of 2015.
let's just hop in the old Google machine. Let's go and find out when it was released. March. So this is actually about a month prior to the printing of that card.
Gotcha.
So I guess in this case, like, it, you could make the case for Impact Tremors, but
It's so weird because there's a ruling on Gatherer for Impact Tremors from 2/25/15. Oh, that must be like a pre-release.
yeah, it might be a pre-release thing. So this card might have been known about, but it certainly wasn't available to play with.
Right.
All right. So and then rounding out the deck, 21 mountains. So Adrian, why isn't this deck good anymore?
It just doesn't really keep up with Boros. It's not good against Boros, would be my opinion.
Yeah, and like the weird thing is nothing it does hits hard enough anymore, it feels like. Like, for listeners at home, like, every creature in this deck besides Beetleback Chief is a 1/1. This deck is
Beetleback Chief's not a 1/1 though. What did you say?
Except for Beetleback Chief, every creature in this deck's a 1/1.
Yes, sorry, I misheard that first part. I thought you were just like Beetleback Chief's a 1/1. Like Mike, no, it's not. That's the problem with all the main deck like trickeries running around and all various red shells. Yeah, it's just not as good. Because people brought that in to fight Delver, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I just think that the deck gets outclassed very quickly, specifically by Boros. I would be curious to see if it has a decent blue black Delver matchup. I'm sure there would be a counter argument though, saying that Augur is a big reason this deck's not good too. Also though, of note, I think that in the modern era, Beetleback Chief wins Sedvi Goblin Heel Cutter, which I think is also from Dragons of Tarkir. I just realized.
No, actually, that was Fate Reforged.
Okay, so it was legal when this deck was around, so that's interesting.
Yeah, Goblin Heel Cutter.
I think this deck is just a little bit more all in on the tokens plan than on the one Goblin, one card plan.
Yeah, because also, like, Heel Cutter doesn't trigger your raid bombardments, blah blah blah. Like, there's definitely been multiple takes on the Goblins deck. This was just the one that we picked for it being almost exactly 3 years old. But yeah, like, this deck just doesn't do a lot these days, and it's kind of bizarre because this used to be a mainstay. All right, I'm gonna open the can of worms though. Adrian,
what
would this deck be good if it had Goblin Grenade?
I don't think so.
Why?
I don't think that. I just don't think so. I'm trying to think of why. I don't think Reckless Abandon is good enough. So I don't think the extra point in Goblin Grenade is either.
I mean, so when we started playing at Pat's all those years ago,
we never banned it.
We never banned it. And my experience with it largely was it was a really cool way to get 2-for-1.
Yeah, not only because now foil exists, worst case scenario, but like Counterspell, Hydroblast,
Spellstutter Sprite, Daze.
Pick your poison. It's really not that strong.
Yeah, and like 2-for-1ing yourself in a deck that already is playing like a very kind of low impact game card to card. It's because like much like Elves is a very synergy driven deck. Like most of the cards in Elves are pretty miserable if they're the only thing you control, but together they're better than the sum of their parts. And this has that, except it doesn't do disgusting things where it dumps half its deck onto the board. So I don't know. I miss Goblins. I do really love this list. I think actually the first time we met, I was playing Goblins.
Yeah, and I was like, wow, this guy's trash. He's playing Goblins.
I do love me some trash. That same night, though, I did manage to absolutely wreck some Familiars player by boarding in Rays and feeling like a 3,000 IQ genius.
That's also back when Familiars was good.
It was. This was the days of Familiars being a very good card or a very good deck. And yeah, like the sideboard to this deck is nothing more than you'd really expect. Pyroblasts. Interestingly, it sideboards Flame Slash, and I'm willing to bet that's Affinity.
Yes, definitely. Affinity has so many 4/4s. I actually think I built a list very similar to this for my girlfriend at the time. Pyroblast, obviously very good, very strong red spell, 4 of them. I don't know why you'd be mono red and not play it. 2 copies of Rays, which is that the one did you just mention? You played that against that Familiars player? Yeah, that card is sick. I actually played that in my Affinity sideboard for a little bit to battle Tron. I've done a lot of weird things with Affinity. You've also got 2 Smash the Smithereens, destroy target artifact, deal 3 damage. Also good against Affinity. I think Affinity was a much better deck back then. Affinity's like not a deck anymore, I feel like.
I mean, it still puts up the occasional result, but like, yeah, Affinity was one of the big bads at the time. Because I think,
man, I really liked playing Affinity.
This must have been just ever so slightly after Cruz got banned, right?
Man, I really liked playing Affinity.
This was actually Cruz era.
I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, no. This was a nice little trip down memory lane, though. I do miss this deck, but it definitely makes sense as to why people don't play this anymore. Now, do you think there's anything that could possibly bring this deck back into relevance, or is this just kind of a relic of the past?
I think its moment in the sun is over.
I think that's fair. Like, it's had plenty of time to figure out a new game plan, and like you do get to do cool stuff. Like there's Goblin Heel Cutter, there's Sting Scourger that we didn't talk about. But yeah, I think this is officially a dinosaur. And we didn't even get into the first result. One of the first results that came up when I looked for goblins lists on a Goldfish was Grixis goblins. We didn't even get into any of that nonsense. But
Grixis goblins?
Yeah. Some of the black goblin cards from Lorwyn or Shadowmoor, I guess. And then it just splashed blue for Muldrifter.
Oh my god. Remember when playing Muldrifter was a thing?
I do. Pepperidge Farms remembers. All right. I think that's quite enough nonsense for one evening. Adrian, would you like to take us out of the show?
Yeah, I'll take us out on a date, and then I'll take us out on the show. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This podcast is brought to the support of our lovely patrons, including Deathbite. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you that if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list and idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pat's Games, Mike's LGS JP Comics, and of course the ever-talented musical L. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike signing off for Color Commentary.